There is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun. Been the run of many poor boys, and the old call on. If there is no one by myself.
The county of Essex, northeast of London, once the land of open space and opportunity. By the mid-1990s, it had become a war zone.
Gangsters against gangsters. That's how this business works. If you do someone a bad deed, they're going to come back and do you one.
Gang warfare poisoned the dream as organised crime spilled out of London's East End into the fields, beaches, streets and nightclubs of Essex.
We're talking guns, knives or whatever you need to win. There was going to be a war.
It's a story that's now hit the big screen. But in this programme, for the first time, it's told by the men who had their fingers on the triggers.
Just empty the gun into him and go bang, 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 bang.
They reveal how sex, drugs and rock and roll fueled the fight for the new criminal frontier in the new towns of Essex.
Evolution of drugs, evolution of music was always going to overtake us. It was just a flood of villainy with violence.
And how 4 decades of vice and murder culminated in one of the most infamous gangland killings in underworld history.
They were the worst of the worst. Couldn't afford to take chances with them. They had to go.
One winter's night in 1995, 3 gangsters drove down a country lane in the village of Retendon. They were the notorious Essex Boys, and they were falling into a trap. Their reign as one of Britain's most ruthless drug gangs was about to end. Within minutes, all 3 men were gunned down in a violent ambush.
He shot Rolf behind the ear, he shot Tucker in the side of the face, and then he shot Tate in the liver.
The next morning, Retendon awoke to a horrific crime scene. And the Essex Boys were destined to go down in underworld legend.
Detectives believe the killings have all the hallmarks of a gangland murder.
As the media feasted on the story, it emerged that areas of Essex were in the grip of a violent drugs war, waged by bloodthirsty gangs.
The dirty business of drugs in Essex overtook most counties. If you start dealing with drugs in back alleys, in farm tracks, you're probably not going to drive out of there, and that is what Essex became.
The Essex Boys' brutal end epitomised the county's plight as gangster battled gangster and created a living nightmare for police. Danny Woolard is a veteran of the Essex underworld. Since the 60s, he's made a fortune from robberies and now lives on a piece of prime Essex real estate.
Leave off, wait!
He witnessed brutal drug wars transform the county.
The only people who make a living are drug dealers. I don't know why drug dealers wouldn't deal with it. I don't trust them for one thing. I wouldn't trust them. And they've not done their apprenticeship. They do a couple of drug deals and they're villains.
Woolard is part of the criminal old school whose violence built gangland Essex. Like many successful criminals, he grew up in London's East End, which in the 1960s was a hotbed of organised crime. Woolard had a reputation for violence, and in the East End, that was a valuable commodity. He was employed by gangsters to force businesses to pay protection money. Amongst those paying for his services were the notorious Cray twins. Ken Tappenden joined the regional crime squad covering London and the surrounding counties and was targeting the Cray's extortion rackets.
If you didn't pay them to look after you, then they actually damaged you. It's as simple as that. That's how extortion works. They were the people to catch.
In 1969, the police crackdown sent shockwaves through the underworld when the Crays were jailed for life. For years they'd seemed untouchable, but their very public murder of 2 East End gangsters signalled the end of their empire. With the police on their trail, criminals were facing extinction. To survive, they fled the overcrowded and over-policed East End. They needed a new home, and they knew just where to look.
EastEnders always looked to Essex as a place to get away to. It's always where you wanted to go, a weekend away. So there has always been this thing about getting away to Essex.
60 times the size of the East End, it had everything they could wish for. Miles of unguarded coastline. A new generation of criminals emerged in Essex, ruthless in their determination to follow in the footsteps of the Krays and become kings of this new underworld.
People like the Blundell family, they actually stepped into their shoes. And I say that they were more dangerous in the way they thought, the way they operated, the way they undertook their criminality than ever the Krays would have been.
BillyBlundell was one of the most powerful figures in the Essex underworld.
The worst thing you can ever do in a criminal fraternity is be successful.
A policeman's son, Blundell had also grown up in the East End. With his brother Eddie, he got rich selling ice cream, as the capital's swinging image attracted unprecedented numbers of tourists. But the Blundells were men of violence, and any competition were literally beaten off.
I've had more fights on the cobbles than I ever did in the boxing ring. But it was the norm. We didn't think it was, you know, there'd be loads of tourists about, like a bit of fun for them.
By the 1970s, the Blundells' ruthless approach to business had made them a lot of money. BillyBlundell could now afford the Essex life he couldn't get in the East End.
It was my dream to buy a small holding and build a house there and have a lake and stables, and that's what I did. I had my dream come true.
Now that he had a foothold, Blundell was ready to expand his empire. The bloody battle for the Essex underworld was about to begin, and it started in a remote field. In the summer of 1971, the county was in a celebratory mood. 150,000 people flocked to the quiet village of Wheely in North Essex for a pop festival featuring stars like T-Rex and Rod Stewart. The Blundells were running catering and brought their own security. Other traders knew they had to pay them a cut or pay the consequences. But as the event got underway, the brothers realised they weren't the only violent gang in town.
The Hells Angels turned up, about 200 of them on motorbikes and all that, and just pushing the workers off and just helping themselves to dogs and hamburgers, and they were powerless to stop them, you know.
The fearsome Hells Angels were bad for business, and Billy knew they had to be dealt with.
At that time, it was like hippies and all that, you know, and overnight everybody was walking around with these ponchos on, had some ponchos, you know. So we all did the same, but underneath our ponchos we had pickaxe handles and bricks and all sorts of things. And what we was doing, we was going in little crews, coming out the crowds, saying about, giving it to them, then moving on, so they didn't know where it was coming from, you know.
The hard face of hard rock had met their match, and eventually police took the Hells Angels away for their own protection. BillyBlundell was establishing himself in Essex, but he was fighting battles on many fronts, and this got him noticed. Later that year, the violence spilled out onto the streets during a feud with a rival gang.
Milford Road was quite busy, and all hell broke loose, basically, because I'm firing in the street, people are running for cover, went on and on, you know.
Blundell was arrested and charged with attempted murder. In court, one detective came under attack from an unlikely member of Blundell's family, his mum.
She said, "You bastard," she said, "you're always picking on my boys, all the time." He said, "Mrs. Blundell, I'm not picking on your boys at all. Your son shot 3 people in Ilford High Road in front of witnesses." She said, "You bloody liar." She said, "My boys are good boys, I don't do them things. So you can't do no wrong in your mum's eyes, you know."
He did no wrong in the jury's eyes either. They found he'd acted in self-defense. It would be another 11 years and 13 trials before the law finally caught up with BillyBlundell. But while Blundell fought on the streets and fields, on the coast, a new type of crime was emerging. Essex was a gateway to Europe, and at ports such as Tilbury, millions of pounds worth of goods were loaded onto lorries every day. On the open roads, trucks had always been vulnerable to hijackers. Now, enterprising criminals bought farmland in the countryside and rented out barns for hijackers to store their stolen goods. The barns became known as slaughters because of the way the trucks were stripped to the bone.
Lorry loads of whiskey, gin, whatever you wanted to say went off the roads, and that turned out to be the next area of crime. They run it into a slaughter and you wouldn't find it for months.
Gangland Essex was evolving, and in the quiet fields and farmland, criminal networks had started to take root. The pioneers had laid the foundations for a new underworld. And from the start of the 80s, that meant drugs.
With drugs, what you want is a slice of the market. You don't have to live in a particular territory in order to dominate it. So Essex became viable because in Essex you've got the coast, you've got fields, you've got barns. So Essex became an ideal venue for the new market that was typified by drugs.
For the next 20 years, the Essex underworld would tear itself apart in a bloody battle to control the drug trade. Profits were huge, and the marketplace full of ruthless criminals.
BillyBlundell now lives in rural Essex. He's a wealthy man and enjoys pottering around on his farm. Hello, boy.
In 1983, shortly after appearing in a TV documentary, BillyBlundell was arrested on his Essex farm for conspiracy to manufacture amphetamines.
The Crown said the drugs were worth nearly £1 million on the black market. They said Blundell was the gang's Mr. Big. The judge described him as an evil man.
To this day, Blundell protests his innocence.
I rented them a house that I owned, which they used. Although I knew what they was doing, I wasn't a part of their conspiracy. They got raided by the police, and the police put me up as the Mr. Big in the background. There you go, Prince Philip would have got found guilty.
At Chelmsford Crown Court, Blundell got 8 years jail for conspiring to run an illicit amphetamine factory.
So that was number 13. I'd had 12 not guilties on the trot over the previous 20 years. I was charged with attempted murder on a couple of occasions that I got out of. But all the things that I got found not guilty was, some of them were a little bit near the mark, so although I got 8 years for something I didn't do, I'm not too bitter because it's sod's law, I'm paying for yesterday.
After the guilty verdict, speculation was rife. Why had Blundell purchased his Essex farm? An associate of the man who'd sold the farm had his own theory.
Mr. Blundell wanted that house because it had a big garden with a lake in it, and he wanted that lake for drug smuggling. With other words, aeroplanes could fly over and drop the drug.
This claim was never proven and is denied by Blundell. But one thing was clear: the demand for recreational drugs was booming, and for criminals, that meant big business. In the mid-80s,